Medic!
Welcome back to another edition of the Medic Up podcast. Today we're going to have Charlie Martel, a.k.a. Tier, who is a Special Forces medic from the U.S. Army. And pretty lucky enough to have him tell a story about doing an amputation in the field in Afghanistan, almost up on the Pakistan border in 2003. Absolutely resource limited, and just to kind of give you guys a lead in, I just really want you to listen to his mindset and how he prepared for it and how he dealt with stuff that came up throughout the procedure. It's a great story. You guys can check him out on Instagram and other social media. On Instagram, he's Red Leader Standing By. Just go ahead and search that account and look for some of the medical goodness he throws up there. Also, he's a great writer. You can read some of his posts on there. It's very verbose. The guy's got away with words. And it's kind of a weird episode. It should be like a part one of the two because we kind of run out of time. I have to like awkwardly leave at the end of it to go teach a Stop the Bleed class. And before that, we kind of trail off talking about tourniquets. So give it a listen and just really focus in on his mindset of what was going through his head while he was trying to prepare and perform this procedure in an extremely resource-limited region with, relatively inexperienced people. He didn't have a full surgical team. It's good stuff to listen to. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Fuel the Machine Apparel. Fuel the Machine Apparel is based on the idea of not just a brand, but a lifestyle. They're pro-health, pro-first responder, pro-military. They believe, you got to take care of yourself before you can help others. So they believe strongly in fitness and things like that. It's a great first responder owned and operated company. All their t-shirt designs are their own. They come up with them. They print them right here in the U.S. They're their own quality control. So like they say, Fuel the Machine Apparel, be the solution, not the problem. Go ahead, check them out. www.fuelthemachineapparel.com. Like I said before, I have my personal favorite. I've got my Uberlance t-shirt. Thing is awesome. Death Fighter looks great. They just dropped the paramedic one. So any of my 80s kids out there who watch G.I. Joe coming up, go check out the website. You'll see what I'm saying. These aren't those, like I said, those cheesy fire department EMS t-shirts like Race the Reaper and I Fight What You Fear. These things look awesome, man. Go check them out. www.fuelthemachineapparel.com. And if you're looking for first aid equipment, IFAC's trauma equipment. If you're working on the street or you got friends who are first responders, go check out Medical Gear Outfitters. It's owned and operated by a paramedic. He's got a mission to equip individuals with the top quality supplies, training, and the mindset that they need to empower themselves to respond to an emergency. They've got the equipment and the training you need. Head on over to www.medicalgearoutfitters.com. Check out their selection of pre-made first aid kits and trauma kits. If you're looking for a Stop the Bleed kit, Medical Gear Outfitters got you covered. If you want to build your own kit, you want to spec out your own stuff, they got the pouches, they got the gear. You can mix and match. You can build a kit from anything from a family first aid kit, bumps, scrapes, stings, stuff like that, all the way up to Stop the Bleed, a first responder IFAC kit, anything. You can also build up your big mass casualty kits as well. You don't see it on the website, drop them an email, they'll get you squared away. Got free shipping on all orders as usual. And if you guys check out the show notes, you'll get 10% off when you go check out their store through the Medic Up podcast link. So www.medicalgearoutfitters.com. Remember, you never know when you'll be the first responder. Get the right gear and the right training. Medical Gear Outfitters. And now here's Charlie Martel, Red Leader Standing By. Give it a listen. I hope you guys dig it. Today on the Medic Up podcast, we've got Charlie Martel from the internet / Instagrams, a.k.a. Tier.
Tier, yep. Tier's my real name. Charlie Martel is my...
And if, again, I didn't get a big bio from you, so you're going to have to kind of give us, and I'll roll it into our first question, and we'll just get right into it. If you guys don't follow Charlie, or actually on Instagram, it's at Red Leader Standing By. You guys know a little bit about him if you're in the medical community. Definitely the military community. So you are still, I think, 18 Delta.
I am. So, yeah, I I'm an 18 Delta. I'm a little out of currency just because I came off deployment. But I'm also a little out of currency because I'm a sergeant major in Special Forces now, and I have been for a few years. But I'm in the National Guard, so my civilian job is actually as an 18 Delta, and my military job is running around with a coffee cup telling people that their mustache looks terrible.
Right. So that's good stuff. So are you kind of at the end of your career, or just kind of finishing out or getting ready to retire, or?
I'll have 24 years in May.
Right on.
I know my youthful beauty does not give that away, but yeah, I would say I'm in the August of my career. As long as I don't piss off the wrong people, I should be able to keep trucking. I don't by any means feel like I'm done. I feel like I've still got some gas in the tank and some more to give, so I'll keep trucking as long as they let me.
That's great. And I've followed you probably since about maybe early mid 2017 when you did a photo essay that maybe I think North American Rescue probably reposted, and it was a case that you'd done a field amputation, and we followed that patient for a while. So, but you've spent a lot of your deployed career, or a lot of your career prior to the last 2 years as an 18 Delta in Special Forces. How did you get up? How did you end up in there? Was that just like, hey, I know the military always says we need medics, or was it something you were looking to do, or it was just an open spot and you said, or someone said you got voluntold and said, hey, you're going to school?
I wish I could say it had anything to do with wanting to make the world a better place or any sort of altruism, but it was. I got into SF. We'll back it up. I used to ride horses for the Army. I started off driving tanks, and that had nothing to do with anything I wanted to do either. I started off driving tanks because I wanted to get out and go back to the ski resort I worked at prior to joining the Army and drive snowcats, because that was the coolest job on the mountain. So huge aspirations. When I got to Fort Hood, Texas, they were looking for people to volunteer to be in this horse-mounted unit. It was a show unit. And I didn't really have any desire to go to Kuwait, which is where my unit was going right off the bat. So I tried out for this, and there was a lot of hazing. It was hard, but I was an E-nothing, so all I knew was hard and getting yelled at. So it was kind of water off a duck's back. And I spent the first 4.5 years in the Army, going around the country TDY and riding horses for the Army. When I left that and went back to an armor unit, I was not happy because there was no esprit de corps like what I had grown up with in the horse detachment. The horse detachment was completely volunteer. If you didn't like how hard it was, the door was right there. You could go back to a regular line unit anytime you wanted. And it was hard work being out there. Everybody gave it their all, or they weren't there. And when I went back to a regular line unit, I didn't experience that. So I was playing rugby for the post rugby team, and a buddy of mine, a teammate of mine, was going to SFAS, Special Forces Assessment and Selection. And so I decided to go to the SF recruiter with him, and they sent me to selection. The other reason I went to selection, though, was honestly, if I hadn't gone, I had in the back of my mind that if I didn't go, I'd always wonder if I could have made it. I'd be that guy at the bar that said, oh, yeah, I was going to do that, but, blah, 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 X, Y, Z. And I have some of those stories from further selections, but I don't have that about SFAS, and I'm pretty taxed about that. But at that point, when I went to selection, it was 21 days of pure suck, and there were several times I wanted to quit. I had some pride at the end of that 21 days when they selected me, and at that point, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, both physically and mentally. And they gave me a list of MOSs to choose from for, my preference. The Army's going to choose it at the end of the day. But I wrote down 18 Delta because I'd just done the hardest thing in my life. Why not keep that thing going? I'd heard 18 Delta was the hardest one, so that's how I ended up being in 18 Delta. I challenged myself. I passed that challenge, so I went on to the next challenge. And 18 Delta was that next challenge.
Fantastic. And again, for people that don't know, 18 Delta is what? Special Forces Medical Sergeant.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So how long? What is when you say it's known as the hardest training that you can do? What makes it hard? Like how long is that training? I think when people understand that it puts it in perspective, how much you learn in a very short period of time.
Sure. Yeah. So the Special Forces qualification course for the other MOSs is about a year. It's about a year and a half with language training. The medical portion of the 18 Delta course, Special Forces Medic course, by itself is a year. When you put that into perspective, physician's assistant school is 2 years, and 1 year of that is clinicals. 1 year of that is school. So you're taking a dude off the street who may or may not have any medical background whatsoever, and you're making him one of the best medics in the world, bar none. I don't have any qualms about saying that. That is not hyperbole. And you're not training them in a specialty. You're training them in all the specialties. So now you've got a dude that after a year is an expert in combat trauma management. He knows clinical medicine. He's done hospital rotations. He's worked in an ER as a medical provider. He knows paramedicine. I did a month-long rotation with FDNY, worked in the back of a bus in the South Bronx, bouncing around old Dead Rabbit Society type streets. That was interesting. We do basic dentistry. We know basic veterinary work. We can do our own labs with a field set. We do our own radiology. It's drinking from the fire hose, and you've got to be in commando type shape the whole time you're doing this. So that's what makes it so difficult. Is you are a master of all. I won't say you're a master of all trades, because there's no way you can cram 8 years of medical school into 1 year, especially when you're doing commando stuff as well. But yeah, we're definitely top of the game in combat trauma management, and we know enough of all those clinical specialties that we can at least narrow down a diagnosis and do some telemedicine if we need to.
Right, and you're doing it again, like I was kind of saying before in the interview, in the pre-interview stuff. It's resource limited, because it's great to be able to do that type of medicine. First world country trauma center, maybe an hour or two away, we need a helicopter. But when you're ending up having to do jungle medicine, I don't have anything to plug my POCUS probe into all of a sudden, or the batteries are done, or something happened, and now you're back to doing percussion the old way, trying to figure out what's going on in someone's chest or belly, or trying to again use your environment, your resources. So
yeah, I've definitely done the old tap on the ribs, and looked around for a fundoscope when I'm there at a mud hut on the Pakistani border. Yep.
So what are pretty much team responsibilities for the 18 Delta? Like you've got your team, and then Special Forces, kind of the training model is train the partner forces, and one guy trains two guys train four guys train, and the force multiplier is kind of that's publicized for Special Forces.
Sure.
But what else is there?
Well, so sometimes it'll depend on if your ODA, which is a Special Forces team, Operational Detachment Alpha, has a specialty. Most of the specialties have to do with the infiltration routes, like if you're a dive team or a free fall team, something like that. So you've got to keep those skills up as well. But there's also administrative tasks. So a Special Forces team is designed to be completely inclusive. It's supposed to be a 12-man unit that operates at a company level as a battalion level force multiplier, if that makes any sense. So the team leader, a captain, would be advising an indigenous battalion commander. And each one of those guys on a team could be, the senior guys could be essentially a company commander, and the E6s could be platoon sergeants. So that's how it was designed for unconventional warfare. Because we have that level of maturity and staff ability, skill level, planning, everything else, we also take care of our own administrative stuff within the team. So for example, in 18 Charlie, the engineer on the team, his collateral duty administratively is to be the team supply sergeant. The medic, the 18 Delta, his collateral duty is to be the admin clerk. So not only is he handling all the medical stuff for the team and the medical readiness, he's also handling all the administrative readiness, all the pay problems, just the mountain of paperwork that goes into keeping a soldier ready by Army standards is staggering. And I feel that especially now that I'm a sergeant major. It's just crazy. So you're pulled in a lot of different directions. When you tack on all the additional advanced skills like being a sniper, being a JTAC, all that stuff, it is, even as a part-time 18 Delta, you're a full-time 18 Delta. There's really no such thing as a part-time 18 Delta.
That's a full plate one way, either way you look at it. I mean, whether it's, like you said, wow. So let's kind of go back some of that austere medicine and like the resource limited medicine. How does your mindset play a role in that? Like I said, back in 2017, I really became aware of you when North American put that photo essay up. You did that field amputation. So, and like, I was sucked into it. I mean, I love medicine to begin with as a medic, as a paramedic, but, the way it was written and the questions people asked and the takeaway points, I was like, wow, this guy's awesome. And again, it was just like, I've throughout the years, again, I'm spoiled. I'm right down the street from North American Rescue, and we're friends with a lot of them. They've helped out with our classes and stuff at our county EMS service when tourniquets kind of came into existence. So we've kind of met, some special forces medics here and there and PJs and stuff like that. And there's one thing that always strikes me about them is they're super humble, and they will tell you anything you want to know about medicine. Like they've got all that jammed into their head, but they're so happy to kind of pass it on to somebody who takes an interest in it. So, the mindset part of that really, it wasn't for a while that I really understood that plays a really big role in clinical and critical decision making.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with humility. I mean, I'm super humble. Just ask me. I'm so humble. It's crazy. Austere medicine. Well, okay. So since we're talking about the amputation, I guess the first thing I want to say on that is that was an elective surgery, which seems a little crazy that I'm doing an elective surgery in a mud hut on the Pakistani border, wearing mechanic coveralls and a cravat around my beard so my beard hairs don't drop into the guy's wound. But yeah, that was an elective surgery. However, I mean, it's borderline elective. That dude had a non-union fracture for about 8 months prior to coming to see me. That's why he wanted it to be cut off. And there was a hospital about an hour away in Pakistan, but I was never there, but I saw their work. Like, I had sent some people there previously, and then I'd seen the follow-up, and I'd actually fixed some of their work. In my mud hut. I didn't even have a clinic out at that point. We built that base, and the only reason we didn't get rocketed or shot at on a daily basis is because we hired every fighting age male in the area to fill HESCOs. It was so new that when Chinooks would come in, not only were they landing on poppies in full bloom that hadn't been mowed down yet, sometimes they would blow over the HESCOs that hadn't been filled yet. Yeah, so when we say austere, we were even austere by military standards. We were out there flapping. My clinic was the front patio in front of my room, and it was right next to where my team ate, and we were living off the local economy. Our bath was the Kunar River. It was out there. And for any military members that are listening, that base eventually turned into Fob Bostic, which was a major hub for a lot of combat operations in the years after. But at that time, we were the plank holders. We signed the lease for that land with the Afghan landowner, and it was out there. We were the northernmost U.S. presence on the border at the time. So, getting into the austere part of that, I didn't have all the tools in my toolbox to do that procedure the way I wanted to do it. So I actually sent him away. He asked me to cut his leg off. I said, yeah, I can do that. Come back in a week. And as soon as he left, I got on SATCOM and sent off a message to a surgeon that we had in Asadabad, which is a couple hours south. Gave him the case study, everything else, and he's actually the one that gave me permission to do it. So I don't want to make it sound like I was just a cowboy out in the Wild West, or in that case, the Wild East, and just doing my own thing. I actually had some medical oversight and some notes. Now, once the dude came in, I was it. I was the surgeon. I was a surgeon. I was the attending doctor. I was the lead anesthetist. I was everything. But I did have permission from a full-blown MD surgeon to do the procedure.
And it pretty much went from there.
It went from there. Yeah, I mean, I can talk through the procedure if you want me to.
Well, I mean, it's more, absolutely, but I mean, it was definitely, what goes. It was really what I'm looking for is what really goes through your mind when you have to play all those roles and you don't have a clinic set up. You're playing 5 roles. They're all critical. It's not like you're like, I'm going to teach someone to be the anesthetist today. You're monitoring IV anesthesia. You're monitoring airway. You're doing the cutting.
Right.
That's what I want to hear about that.
Sure. So at that time, that was my first trip, and I was less than a year out of the 18 Delta course at that point. My skills were fresh, and I gotta be honest, I was pretty cocky. I was the Han Solo of military medicine. I was out there doing my own thing, and I was confident in my abilities. If you asked me to do that again today, I would probably be like, let's find another 18 Delta, or at least a team of 18 Deltas, and do this together. And I mean, some of that's just because I don't practice medicine nearly as much now as I did then. So my tactile skills are a little less than they were then. I do a lot of but yeah, back then my skills were fresh and they were sharp. But looking back on it, I know the mistakes I made in that procedure as well. So what went through my mind then was, yeah, absolutely, I can do this. And then when I actually got into the procedure, there was a couple of hold my breath moments where things were going south and there wasn't a lot I could do about it except keep charging through because I was already in the procedure. But at the same time, everybody's looking to me like I'm a medical god, and I can't, I've assembled a surgical team at this point, which consisted of my warrant officer. I trained him to do the anesthesia, which really I just trained him to do the circle of life checks, checking for pain response, checking respirations, et cetera, so forth. And then informing me if anything happens so I could adjust, I could titrate the anesthesia accordingly, which I was running through his sternum, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I ran it through a fast one, and I okayed into his sternum. I was doing a ketamine trip. Yeah, I induced him with midazolam, and he had some morphine on board as well. But yeah, it was ketamine that was keeping him at surgical plane. And then my assistant surgeon was an 18 Charlie that used to be a corpsman in the Navy before he went to the Q course. So he had some medical experience and he knew about sterile fields and whatnot, which was important. And then my scrub techs were regular Navy corpsmen that were from the Marine platoon we had there for base security. I had one that was actually in the OR that was more or less sterile, at least his hands were, so he could hand me things. And then the other one was a runner that would come in and out. And my surgical suite was a room in the mud hut that we had thrown plastic down. We'd thrown plastic over the window, tried to put plastic over the area where we were doing the surgery in the ceiling so that nothing would fall into the area. And it was the Marine PL's room, and I kicked him out so I could do it. Room. Yeah. What was going through my mind? So let me talk about the oh crap moments in this procedure. I keep checking myself because I was definitely cussing under my breath through a lot of this, and I don't want you to get labeled explicit on your podcast.
Oh, it's already labeled.
Oh well,
it's good.
It then.
It's CMS related, and all my guests have mouth like sailors, so we're good.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll let it fly then. So, okay, so I asked the guy to come back in a week on a Saturday. And the reason I asked him to come back in a week is so I could request the supplies to come in on the ring flight. A ring flight is a resupply bird helicopter that typically comes in once or twice a week to outstations. It didn't always come, and on this particular Saturday morning, it hadn't come, and I wasn't sure if it was going to. And that was typically for security reasons or air assets got diverted somewhere else. So the patient showed up on the back of his nephew, as he was told to do, and he's just sitting up there on the litter hanging out. And the bird hasn't showed up, and I had requested additional meds, especially ketamine, and a surgical ring saw to actually do the amputation because I didn't have that in my kit. And the bird hadn't showed up, so I told the 68 whiskey, a regular Army medic that I had, I told him to go grab the Sawzall blade out of the 18 Charlie kit and put it in my autoclave. So two things about that. If you're not sure what a Sawzall is, that's just a DeWalt reciprocating saw like you'd buy at Home Depot. And his eyes got big, like, you're going to cut this guy's leg off with a Sawzall? I'm like, yeah, maybe.
What saws do, man.
Yeah. And then the second thing to note about that is I didn't have an actual autoclave. My autoclave, I was doing cold sterilization in a plastic, it's kind of like a Pringles can, but it was Lay's potato chips. It was a plastic Lay's potato chip can that I'd filled up with Betadine.
Nice.
So that was, it was like barbershop autoclave, Yeah. So I was just going to set that in there and sterilize the blade that way. After he went to do that, the bird did show up. I got my supplies. I checked everything out. And one thing I learned about medical supply is you get what you ask for. I did not request the handles that go with that saw.
Well, so you just got the middle part of it without the rings. Awesome.
No ring. Yeah. So I tried to get creative. I chucked a couple of smoke grenades out into the LZ and tried to put the grenade pin rings on the handle, and they didn't fit. That didn't work. So I ended up just monkey gripping the thing.
Wow.
Which it's amazing I didn't break the saw. Knowing what I know now about that particular saw, it's amazing. And if you look at the pictures, and if you've ever done any kind of surgery with the saw, you will cringe because you'll see how acute of an angle I was cutting this bone at, and that is a sure way to snap the saw. It is just pure luck, intervention, whatever you want to call it, that I didn't snap the saw. In which case, I probably would have had to have busted out the reciprocal saw again. Yeah. So the second oh shit moment in this was getting IV access on this dude. The guy was no idea how old he was, and that's something about Afghans is they don't know how old they are either. That's just not a thing. I think he told me he was 16, but if you look at pictures of him, he is maybe 16 in leap years. He was up there. He was somewhere between dirt and Jesus. And his skin was tough as leather. I just stood at the head of the litter, and I let all my medical people, I would just point at somebody and say, okay, you're on IV. We had done so many medevacs out there and Casvacs that essentially, unless something was really dire, life-threatening and needed my hands on it, I would stand at the head of the litter and act like an attending ER doc and just point at people and tell them what to do. And that's what I did when we were prepping this patient. But nobody could get an IV on him. So I was down to two options. I could either do a venous cut down, which is where you actually incise the skin, lift the vein out by putting mosquito forceps underneath it, and then cannulate the vein that way and sew it in. Or I could do a jug stick. Jug stick, obviously, being the less invasive of these two procedures. Keep in mind, this is 2003, so combat medicine is still, I would say, it's in its new infancy. There's a lot of things we know now that we either had forgotten completely or didn't know at all back then. So, jug stick. I go to do the jug stick. I had been trained how to do it, but I'd never actually done one on a human. And I got the stick, I got flash, but I didn't get a lot of flash. And this is an important lesson for any of the EMTs that might be listening to this. If you're doing a jug stick, doing it on the jugular vein, you will get flash initially, but it will not flash back. It's not going to flood that flash chamber. And if you normally when you do an IV, say you're doing on the AC, the big old pipe right there in the front of the elbow, if you don't occlude the vein, what happens? Blood goes everywhere. Yeah, freaks out your preceptor, freaks out your partner. Honestly, not that big of a deal because my preceptor, my paramedic partner in the FDNY, I was notorious for not occluding the vein when I was doing an IV in the back of the bus. She said, "You're going to bleed him out." I was like, "No, I'm not. it's not enough blood to do that." Anyway, this makes a mess to clean up is really all it is. I digress. You do not get that same amount of flash in a jug stick. So when I just got a little bit of flash in the chamber, but not enough to fill it and not enough pressure to actually come out the end of the back of the cannula, I thought I had blown the vein. And that was an oh shit moment. Knowing what I know now, I know I had a patent stick. I had a patent vein, and I could have run everything through that. But I didn't know that. So I DC'd the whole process and decided to go from there. It was a good stick. I didn't think it was a good stick, so I moved on. I had this new thing in my aid bag called a Fast One, interosseous kit that looks like just brutal torture device. But I'd never used it. I'd been issued 2 of them. It was new equipment. So I decided that was less invasive than doing a venous cut down. So I had one of my Navy corpsmen reading the instructions off while I did it.
On the job training.
On the job training, yeah. And somehow that did not lose confidence in the people around me, or they didn't lose confidence in me with that. So I got the IO into the guy's chest, and by this time I had given him ketamine IM to start knocking him out because I felt bad for the dude. He'd been stuck. He'd already been a pincushion. He's got a leg that's dangling off. You know, the dude's in constant pain. So I'd give him a little morphine bump, and I'd give him a ketamine. I forget how many megs, but what I do remember is you can give 13 milligrams per kilogram for about half an hour of surgical plane. But maybe it's 10. I don't know. It's been a while. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, I gave him enough to knock him out. Yeah, so he was down and out before I did the IO kit and before I did the jug stick, just because I felt bad for the dude. So we move him into the OR suite, do all the prep, put a ace bandage on his leg to squeeze as much O2 carrying blood back into the body that's staying as possible. I put a tourniquet above the knee to keep from bleeding. And by the way, tourniquets back then, we did not have commercially produced tourniquets. So this tourniquet was actually a cravat and some tongue depressors taped together for a windlass and the ring from a Gatorade bottle to secure it. Yeah.
I think I remember reading that. I thought that I was trying to zoom in on the picture to see how I could see it, but yeah, that's awesome.
I also had a non-windlass one-handed tourniquet that had come out of JSOC. One of the medics there invented it, and it didn't work well, but that's the best of what we had for commercially produced tourniquets then, even though it was the Army that was producing it. I might have one of those floating around in an old box somewhere. If I can find it, I'll post a picture of it. Yeah. So 1 is done, 2 is 1. I had 2 tourniquets on there. And then I was going to do what's called a shark bite technique, which is where I basically cut a V in the skin. It kind of looks like a Pac-Man mouth. So you cut the tissue along that V-shaped line, and then you cut the bone at the apex of that line. The intent being, when you close the wound, you've got enough muscle and tissue to cover the stump of the bone. So you're cutting the bone shorter than you're cutting the tissue. This was a huge oh shit moment, maybe the biggest oh shit moment, because I didn't rehearse this with my assistant surgeon, my 18 Charlie. I assumed because he was so good at doing all this other trauma medicine with me, I never really had to tell him to do anything. I thought he was a SOCM graduate, and he was not. And even if he was, we don't really get into surgery until SFMS, the second half of the 18 Delta course. So when I handed the scalpel to him to make his cut, he cut just a straight vertical line, even with the apex of my shark bite. Yeah, and I remember just this, no! So I decided that was a problem, but we were going to have to deal with it when we got to that point. Started incising through all the tissue, and this is one of those procedures where you have to be aggressive. I mean, you can cut through the skin and be delicate there just to get your line down, but after that, man, it's butcher shop medicine.
Yeah, it's like cutting through raw steak. I mean, you have to cut through muscle and yeah.
Yep. But so the tourniquets that I had on there, they were not tight. So he was still bleeding. And the reason they weren't tight is because at that time with tourniquets, we believed that if you cranked a tourniquet down on somebody, they were going to lose that limb. That's what we had been taught. Even as 18 Deltas, that's what we've been taught. And unfortunately, that is still common knowledge or common belief to a lot of preceptors and a lot of EMS program managers and attending docs. And the word is finally getting out through programs like Stop the Bleed and my buddy's program, First Care Provider, where they just go around the country educating both first responders, lay people, and EMS personnel. Tourniquets save lives. They do not cost limbs unless you can have a tourniquet on somebody for, let's see, I think the current standard is 6 hours.
Yeah, 4 to 6 hours is pretty much local civilian EMS. And
yep. So what I teach lay people when it comes to tourniquets is, when in doubt, whip it out, right? Most EMS and doctors will say you need to put it as low as you possibly can. I go against that, because if I'm telling somebody, if this is the one time this one person has got a chance to save somebody's life, I'm telling them to put it as high and tight as possible, because I don't want them to have to second guess or adjust or anything else.
Yeah, we're pushing high or die, high and tight, the whole 9 yards. We don't even do like the step 2 anymore. Like if you can visualize the wound 2 to 4 inches above, listen.
Right.
That's great if you have the time and you have one patient. But if you're in active violence or you're in mass cal, whatever it is, it's high and tight. And again, we're spoiled. I have two level 1 traumas within 35 miles of each other. We're going to be okay. They're not going to be on for 6 hours.
Well, you know what? Even in austere medicine, wilderness medicine, I'm telling people, put it high and tight, put it over the club. Because if it's bad enough bleed that you've got to put a tourniquet on, every second counts. You've got a gusher there. You've decided this is massive hemorrhage. It doesn't matter if it's arterial or venous. Blood's blood. If once it's out of the container, it's not carrying oxygen anymore. So you're putting that thing as high and tight. And for people listening, the reason you do that is because your pipes are bigger the closer you get to the heart. Not only that, but if we're talking about your limbs, you've got one big backstop as a femur in the leg and one big backstop as a humerus in the arm. If you go below that, now you're fighting against 2 bones. Arteries run next to bones. So the whole idea with a tourniquet is you're compressing that garden hose of an artery against something hard, which is that long bone. If you do that against a tib fib, it's harder to do. If you do it against a radius and ulna, it's harder to do. It's easy to do. I can do it with my fingers against my humerus. And I don't know if you've seen pictures of me, but I got some guns, so no big deal. Femur's a little harder to do with manually, but you can do it with a knee or with your palms. You can do it. But the point is, you've got to go high and tight so you compress that artery against that longbow. And you don't, if you put it low, I guarantee you're going to end up moving it, you're going to end up adjusting it, and all that clotting that you may have gained, you're going to lose as soon as you move that tourniquet. So that is a huge educational piece that people need to realize. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that are pushing protocols in the field are not people in the field. They're people that are standing at the head of a bed at a hospital and can direct traffic and have all these other tools in their toolbox and have multiple trained personnel to do exactly what they're telling them to do. It really we need more representation for TCCC and TECC from tactical people that have been in the field that have done this for real.
We're trying. We're trying to push it as much as we can. Man, it feels like it's getting harder though, with a lot of the products that are coming out and the different companies trying to make tourniquets and having that is it CATI approved versus not CATI approved argument every week. It's gotten to me to the point where I don't really want to. I've scaled back my TEC, even the NAEMT TECC course. It's just there's so much weird thinking out there. I spend half of a class trying to discount weird EMS dogma, and it's like, God, I tell them, this is a civilian trauma course. I don't kick doors. I don't wear a special colored hat. I have no military training. I'm not on a SWAT team, but I'll teach you trauma medicine. This is a simple toolkit. These are simple skill set anybody should have, but you guys got to understand they're evidence-based. I know what you heard. I know what you think you've heard. We find the fake cats in people's kits. We see EMS systems buying fake cat tourniquets. They're not doing it because they're doing it on purpose. They're doing it because they're trying to save a buck because some logistics person is like, well, budget says this. I can get 10 for this much or I can get 30 for this much. Let's get 30. And you're like, those are airsoft tourniquets. Those are for show. You're not going to save lives. And it's getting harder and harder to do. It seems like it should be getting easier with the amount of data and the success of like hands-only CPR, like the bleeding control. In fact, I hate to do it because I'm going to have to cut you off and we're going to have to pick it back up. We're going to teach a Stop the Bleed to the tri school because they got a bunch of kits and have no idea how to use them.
That is excellent, man. Yeah. So before you cut me off, let me get on one more with commercial tourniquets. You really have to look at the source. I love Amazon. I love Amazon Prime. Be very careful of what you're buying off Amazon and where it came from. Read the reviews. If it sounds like English was not their first language, that's probably a knockoff tourniquet. And why is that important? Well, let's talk about the mechanics real quick. This is not new technology. Romans had commercially, I'm doing air quotes here, you can't see, commercially produced tourniquets for their soldiers way back in the day. This is not new technology. It's just simple mechanics. You're compressing an artery against a bone. So what's the difference, right? We can do an improvised tourniquet and it'll work. It's not as fast, but we can do it. The difference is CAT tourniquet is on its 7th generation. That means they had to make improvements based on previous failures. The CAT tourniquet has failed. It's a great piece of equipment, but there's a reason it's on its 7th generation. And I do believe in this 7th generation because they upped the quality of plastic they used for the backing and for the windlass because that's what was failing. Wasn't the Velcro or anything else. You're putting a massive amount of torque on this thing. And if this thing has been exposed to the elements, which it's weird, we keep fighting in 120 degree weather. Plastic doesn't do well in that. And sand and dust, everything else, the thing is going to get weak. It's going to be weakened by elements. If you used it in training at all, it's no longer good. This is a one-time use thing. So the 7th generation has good plastic. People that are producing this in China or wherever are not using that same high-grade plastic. So that airsoft tourniquet, you might pay $15 versus $28, but you might die too. So that's really important.
Yeah, most definitely, and we do we find it. We find it in classes. We tell, we'll run something. We'll tell them, hey, bring your aid bag, bring your first aid kit, and we'll look and we'll kind of do a little quick thing about how to spot the fakes. And people will be like, oh, is this fake? I'm like, yep. So, give me that, or you keep it for training. Here's a new one. Here's what to look for the next time. Don't buy from Amazon. Buy from buy from TACMed, buy from North American or their affiliates. You know, do
Yep.
what you got to do. I mean, it's not worth saving the $6 or $7. So, but
Absolutely not.
yeah, we're running into it, and it's just the education. Like I'm afraid to go over to this school right now to hear these teachers, because I know we're gonna do the whole wound packing thing, and I guarantee as soon as our wound trainers start to bleed, they're gonna go, I'm not doing that. Even though it's fake, it's not warm, it's cold, it's not going to hurt them, they can't hurt anybody, it's pieces of plastic. They're going to go, I'm not doing that. They're like, well, you're going to have to one day, possibly. Or, tomorrow when you're in a horrible car wreck and your family member needs a little bit of wound packing before somebody can get to them. So, but yeah, the education is just, it's our job, it's my primary job, but it seems like it's getting more difficult.
Yeah, in the education process, you have to let them know that if this tourniquet is not hurting the patient, they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, pull harder.
Yep.
Pull harder. Cool. Well, I do have to go. I hate that, and I do want to finish up. So let's figure out whatever works for you, and we'll make it happen. And I'll just edit it all together, and it'll be cool.
Yeah, man. Just give me a text, give me a call. You know how to get a hold of me.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate it.
All right, Chris.
All right, man. Have a good weekend.
You too.